Okay, for those just joining us, don't forget to mark yourself here. All right. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to kind of look at where we are in the term so you can see what is due this week. All right. We are starting with the court system. So again, in that three-pronged system that I always use of cops, courts, and corrections, we just finished with going over cops. We are now in the courts. And so we are starting week 6, which is started with November 2nd. Again, Moodle, I always kind of give the dates. So if you're not sure what week it is, and that kind of week 0 kind of threw us off. So sometimes I know some professors are saying we're in week 7. So always just look at what week we are if you're wondering where we are. We are in chapter 7 of your textbook, which you should have read or should be on chapter 7. This is the PowerPoint that goes along with it. And there is one link that I want you to look at this week, which is talking about a viewpoint from the prosecutor. We're going to talk what the prosecutor is this week. And there is one quiz that you will be taking. That's your only assignment. And I think it opens on Tuesday, today, or Thursday. I cannot remember. When you click on it, it will tell you. And it goes over chapter 6, and which we covered last week, which was over policing, and chapter 7, which is over the courts. All right, we're going to start over this PowerPoint, which I will be following today, and depending on how much we get done will depend if we have class on Thursday. And again, this is being recorded, so I will post this lecture as well. Any questions with the assignment or any assignments we've done so far?
I do, sorry. I don't know if you already said this. Are we doing a quiz review today?
Yeah, it just kind of depends how far we get. If we get through the whole lecture, I'll do the quiz today. If we don't, then I'll do the quiz on Thursday. Just kind of depends on how far we get today. Good question.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Well, I guess this is kind of like personal, but I'm not gonna be able to do any work from like Thursday through Tuesday because I'm gonna be hunting. Is there any way you can open that test up earlier? If not, you know, that's on me, but if possible, that'd be great.
Just send me email what's going on, when you'd like it opened. I'll definitely work with you. So just kind of the dates of when you're looking for, if you ever have a certain situation, and then I'll definitely work with you. Okay? What the dates are that
Thank you.
For you. Yeah. All right. So hold on. I've got some students that are in the waiting room. Give me 1 second too. I got an email from a student as well. So give me 1 second while I answer that. Did you guys use the link that was in the Moodle to get on today?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
It took me a bunch of tries to get in.
There we go. Okay. All right. I think we got everybody in now. So I'm going to go ahead and again, if you're just joining late, don't forget to mark yourself here under attendance so that we have you here. All right, so we're going to be going over courts, and courts is a huge system of our three-pronged system as far as cops, courts, and the correctional system. So make sure that you definitely review your book to go over it. My forte is cops because that's what I did. Courts, definitely, if you're continuing on within the CCJ program, Professor Rutsbury, who's actually a judge as well, was a prosecutor. That is her forte, very knowledgeable in that when it gets down to it, because they're very distinct systems. We don't get involved, and it's as it should be. They're very distinct and separate. So when I would make an arrest as a police officer, that's kind of where it went. If I had to testify, then I would come in. I didn't sit through the trial. I was not allowed to. They kept me in a back room. I kind of came in, I testified. I didn't know what was going on. And that's kind of as it should be. I didn't hear what was going on in the courtroom. And a lot of times people would ask me, hey, what happened? And I'd be like, I don't know. You know, if I was a detective and I was on a certain case, I might follow that case through, but otherwise I didn't know. They're very separate, different prongs of the judicial system. And that's as it should be, because we should all have our different viewpoints of it. So for instance, if you take, and again, I'll use the O.J. Simpson case, you know, if you take the cops that responded to the house when there was a 911 call and found the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson, you know, those were the cops that found the bodies. Then the detectives got called out. Those are two different separate parts of cops. Even though they were both cops, those cops that first came out were totally separate than the detectives that were investigating the crimes. And then the detectives did their report, and they were the cops that then submitted it to the court system. The court system then read the reports and said, okay, do we have enough evidence to go to trial on O.J. Simpson? They read, do we have enough probable cause? They were totally separate than the detectives, and they read the reports, they read the evidence, they had their own investigators, and they were separate than the cops. And they determined, the prosecutors, the courts now, worked on their own to determine whether or not, which we're going through now, to determine whether or not they have the evidence, and they're going to go through everything that we're going to go through right now to determine, hey, what do we have? And all the jurors did all the stuff that we're going to go through now, separate than the detectives. If the detectives were going to testify, they came in, they sat on their own, and they didn't listen. They weren't a part of the courtroom. They weren't a part of the trial. They didn't sit and do things. They were separate. So it's kind of as it should be. It's a whole separate thing. So that's what we're going to kind of look at now. All right. So the Constitution is really important because judges are a part of the court, and judges rely on the United States Constitution, especially the U.S. Supreme Court. They interpret the U.S. Constitution because that's where they interpret the Constitution as far as how they're getting their rulings from, and how they get the law from, and how they apply it to what is sitting before them. So very, very important as far as our courts and our Constitution. Again, we have those C's, all those C's. All right, we have what's called our dual court system. So there are two systems of courts. We have, and we've always talked about this. When I was talking about cops, I talked a lot about, we have state cops, which those were your troopers. And then we have federal cops, and those were your federal agents like the FBI. So we also have two types of courts. We have state courts, and we have federal courts. And this is where we get actually our dual court system and our 10th Amendment. So we've talked about some amendments already, and now I'm adding another one. So the 10th Amendment is where we say that the state has the responsibility and the power to establish its own court system. So again, these are checks and balances. So we don't want the federal government to come in and run everything. We've actually said through the 10th Amendment that, hey, we want you to establish your own court system. We want you to have your own civil, your own criminal, and your own public and civil and criminal law system. So it's kind of like when I would respond to calls as a cop, and they would say, somebody would say, my landlord just raised the rent. And I would say, that's a civil problem. And I would say you have to go to civil court. So again, these are checks and balances. So we have cops and courts. What I just did was I said, I'm a cop. I basically work within the law. I don't enact civil law. I just sent them to the court system, to the civil court system within the state. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. So when we compare federal and state courts, if you think about it, the US Constitution is kind of the supreme law of the land within the United States. And it creates a federal system of government in which the power is shared between the federal government all over the United States and then all of the different states. So we have what's called federalism. And because we have federal government and each state has their own government, we've got jurisdiction. So don't you remember how I was talking about jurisdiction is really important to cops, because after a cop arrives on a scene and after they make sure everybody's safe, what's really important is who has jurisdiction, because that determines what detectives are going to investigate the crime and then what court is going to be looking at the evidence and making its ruling. Well, this then goes into the courts. What court is going to be making the ruling? So that's the difference in federal and state court, is because where is the court system and who's going to hear the case is really important as well. So we want to make sure that the right court is hearing the case. We want to make sure that if it's supposed to be in state court, it goes to state court. And if it's supposed to be in federal court that deals with the whole United States, it's in federal courts. So here's just kind of a look, and you guys have access to this PowerPoint, and this is also within your textbook. So I'm not going to read this to you, but I want you to make sure that you understand on your own the court structure, and that you go back and you take time to understand the difference between the court structure within the federal court system and the court structure within the state court system. So I'm going to pause here for a minute, but make sure that you take a photo of this or you know where it is within your textbook so that you can go back and read this and make sure that you have a good base and understanding of the federal and state court system. And this is just kind of a second page on it that goes in and explains it. And this goes into appeals and how things get appealed up through their state court all the way up through the US Supreme Court. And we've already kind of got there without you guys knowing it. We've kind of talked about it already, just through reasonable suspicion and probable cause, even Miranda. That's how people have been contacted by the police, been arrested, been sentenced. So they've been actually through those three-pronged systems, through the cops, through the courts, through the corrections. They've made it through the courts. They've appealed. They've made it through the US Supreme Court. They've gone through all this stuff that I'm showing you. And the US Supreme Court has actually come out and changed the law and changed the way that cops and courts do business and said, hey, you're going to do this instead of this. All right, so again, this is just talking about the differences between the selection of judges now in the federal court system, which hopefully you're watching the news. It's really important, especially now with an election and with the selection of judges in the federal court system and the state court system and how it works. Just so important, and so important as far as what it means in the short term and in the long term, and what it means within our federal court system and in our state court system. All right, so now we've kind of talked about the differences in courts, how judges are selected, and now what types of cases are heard. So I've kind of outlined the federal court system in red and the state court system in green. So Your federal court system deals more with cases that have to do with the constitutionality of a law. So cases involving laws and treaties with the United States, and cases involving ambassadors and public ministers, and maybe two states are having a dispute, or bankruptcy laws, or habeas corpus issues. Now we kind of move over to state court system. And states are looking more towards your criminal cases, your probate issues, meaning probate has to do with when somebody dies and there's a will at stake, or maybe there's no will, and so the state has to step in. You could have a contract case, personal injury, somebody gets hurt. Somebody has got married and they're getting divorced, or they want to adopt a child. So state courts are more of your final arbitrators of their state constitution. So it's more of your things that are going on within your state, where your federal, because I guess looking at it is federal is more of the wide open, and your state court is more of your finer details. Okay, so I kind of did the red, white, and blue star. We're going to start with looking at the U.S. Supreme Court. There's one of those with our 9 justices. And then you have your U.S. Court of Appeals. There's 13 circuit courts. And then there are 94 U.S. district courts. We're going to go into those a little bit. It can get confusing. If you want to learn more about those, just become a CCJ major and take Professor Rutsbury's classes, and you will go into these, or go to law school and you will really get into this and understand this. All right. So again, the U.S. Supreme Court is the highest court in the United States. Pretty cool. There is 9 justices. Pretty cool again. And how do cases come to the U.S. Supreme Court? So it's a pretty lengthy process. This is just kind of a look. I'm never going to ask you how they get there, because I don't think at this level you need to know, or at least have to have it memorized. I think you need to know how to Google it. So if you were ever asked, but I will never ask that of you on a quiz, because you can always Google and find out. And at this level, again, I don't think you totally need to know. But it basically starts out, obviously, you do know through some of our cases that we've talked about, Terry v. Ohio, Tennessee v. Garner, Miranda, you do know that as far as the American criminal justice system, there's arrests that are made that then go to the court system. Somebody is then generally sent to prison. They then go through an appeals court where they're fighting the case, saying, hey, that was an unlawful arrest. It then goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court generally overturns it and says, hey, we need to relook at this. This isn't right for whatever reason on whatever side. And it changes the way we do business. So it's pretty cool when you look at the way we do business. All right, so now we're going to look at, that's just a quick, actually, look at the United States Supreme Court, because we could actually spend weeks and weeks and days on it. But that's a quick look at it. Things that you do want to remember is it's our highest court. There's 9 justices on it. And that some of the cases that are important to the criminal justice system are the ones that I just named. So those are things that you probably do want to remember. All right, now we're going to focus on the white star, which is the U.S. Court of Appeals. You do want to know that there are 13 circuit courts. All right, you don't need to know where they are. This is just kind of a quick map so you can kind of see where those 13 Court of Appeals are across the United States. And then there are 94 U.S. district courts, each with a bankruptcy court, plus you have a U.S. Court of International Trade and a U.S. Court of Federal Courts. And each state forms at least 1 judicial district with at least 2 judges. Larger states are divided into multiple districts, and larger districts may have more judges. There are 94 district courts serving all 50 states as well as U.S. territories, and there are 630 2 district judges. So I don't want you to remember this. Mainly what I want you to know is this one. There's 1 U.S. Supreme Court, there's 13 U.S. Court of Appeals, and there's 94 U.S. District Courts. Those are the important things you need to know because that's what's really running our country. That's the important thing. Any questions yet? And this one you'd have to say something, that way I can hear you. All right, continuing on. Okay, so this is a great question to go into a breakout room for. So, are our courts here for justice? So we're going to ask 2 questions. One is, are our courts here for justice? Yes, no, or maybe. And what are they here for? So what are our courts here to do? So those are the 2 questions you're going to be answering in your breakout rooms. Are our courts here for justice? Yes, no, or maybe. And what are our courts here for? What are they here to do? So when you go to court, whether it be you get a traffic ticket or you rob somebody or you broke into a house, what are our courts meant to do? What are they supposed to do? Or what do you want our courts to do? What's the end outcome? All right, I'm going to put you guys in some breakout rooms, probably give you about 5 minutes to discuss this. And then we'll come back and see what you guys decided. Choose a guest speaker to let me know what you guys decided. All right, let's get started. Which room wants to go first?
I'll go first for, I think, group 5.
Okay, go ahead.
So we came to the conclusion that if cops enforce law, courts are the ones that are carrying out justice. Courts are able to interpret law, and they also give people, one, the right to bring claims to court, but also give people the right to defend themselves in court as well.
Okay. All right, yeah. Good. All right, next room.
In room 1, we kind of talked about how a court can be serving justice, and it usually is most of the time, but it's also dependent on your interpretation of justice. So it's like you can have justice from a legal standpoint, like somebody broke the law and they received justice because they broke that law, but maybe that law is not morally correct in our society. And then there's also the thing where judges interpret the law in their own ways. So maybe their interpretation of it is not going to align with what a lot of other people in society think. So most of the time the court system works and does serve justice, but there is a possibility that it cannot sometimes.
Okay, good. All right, next room.
Yeah, we basically said the same thing as the last group. Like, the courts are there to bring justice for all, but that's obviously not always the case. But I guess that's what it's designed for, to bring fair and right justice for everyone, and good or bad, and yeah.
Okay. All right, next.
We had a similar idea. I don't remember our group number, I'm sorry, but we were kind of talking about how justice is kind of something that we associate with the court systems, but that it's not necessarily like the end goal for the court system as a whole, that the court system is more trying to protect individuals' liberties and rights, and securing justice is sort of an aspect of that, that it not necessarily is a byproduct, but it's related to, it's not necessarily the main goal, but it happens as a result. Like it's a step in the way to the final product, if that makes sense. So it's sort of, it's part of it, but it's not the whole picture.
Okay, good. All right, was there any groups left?
Yeah, our group. So we basically just agreed with what was being said already, but just like kind of adding in addition to that, I just talked about how because police officers don't necessarily know the laws the way that judges and lawyers do, it's like those people's jobs in the court to uphold those laws, since the police officers and the people who are actually doing the arresting may not have the same knowledge and the same interpretations of those laws that the actual courtrooms do.
Okay, good. All right. Anybody else or any other comments?
Yeah, group 6.
Okay.
So we said that we'd like to hope that courts serve justice. We didn't really come up with a definitive answer. We didn't know too much about the court system to come up with a very good answer for that question.
Okay.
But we like to hope.
We hope, right? We hope. All right. Anybody else? Any other comments? All right, let's continue on then. Good answers. All right, so it's tough. Justice is tough because number one, it's up for interpretation. Number two, it's human beings. Number three, do you think if you were a victim of a crime, it would alter your interpretation of what justice is? Do you think if where you grew up, your definition of ethics and morals and social norms, what we've talked about already, will alter your definition of justice? So it's all on a sliding scale or a sliding basis. So justice is different for different people and depending what you are, and you have to keep that in mind, definitely. All right, so again, just what we said, and I think you guys figured that out in your breakout rooms, that justice means different things to different people. A victim of crime would be interested in the outcome, the punishment, you know, the desserts, the retribution, getting even, where a person accused of crime would be interested in the process and want to be treated fairly and impartially. You know, true justice is both about the process and the outcome and where we are in our lives. I mean, depending if you ask somebody, you know, what age they are, what they've gone through. I mean, it's just so different depending on so many different circumstances. All right, so let's look at the role of a judge and what some different things are for a judge and what a judge has to do. So, because it's really multifaceted. I mean, we've looked at the role of a cop and how multifaceted it is. Well, depending on where a judge is and what a judge is doing, it's very multifaceted. So at a trial, the judge is really kind of like a referee and a teacher. They're expected to be impartial, and they're expected to kind of be a referee between the two opposing sides, between your prosecutor and the defense. They're not supposed to be too closely interested in the facts of the case, but they are supposed to be ethically into how each of the two sides are behaving throughout the trial, and especially at the end. The judge acts as the teacher. So now they've been the referee, and now they're the teacher for the jury. That's why you'll always see, and that's what I do like about the TV shows, you know, at the very end you'll see the judge talking to the jury, and they'll be, you know, kind of telling the jury, hey, you're a trier of fact. They're explaining all those complicated points of law, And sometimes they're being a really good teacher to the jury, giving them, you know, an hour or so of mini lessons about the law before the jury deliberates. A lot of times judges are actually teachers. They're professors at, you know, law schools, because that's what their job is during trials, is to be a teacher. All right, so now we're going to look at the kind of process of court and what actually happens. So we've talked about cops and what they do. And so now we're going to look at what does happen. I mean, a lot of us have never been arrested. Some have, but some, even when you go through the process, you don't understand it. It's not like you sit there and they explain it to you and they're all nice and, you know, you get a video tour guide of it like Disneyland. So let's say you go into 7-Eleven and you don't have any money. So you use a toy gun and you hold up the cashier and you take the cash money in the cash register, and the cops respond and you get arrested for robbery. So what happens now? Oops, sorry guys. All right, so you go through all these steps. So here's a quick look at it all, and then we're going to go through each and every one of these. Depending where you live, every state is a little different, but generally what happens is what we call the first appearance. Then we have a preliminary hearing. Then we have an information or an indictment. Then we have an arraignment, an adjudication, and a sentencing. So we're going to go through all this. So when a cop says, hey, you know, I'm just arresting you, they're seriously meaning that. They're just writing the report. You still have lots of time. That they truly mean that. All they're doing is arresting. There's a whole lot of time. It's not a conviction. That's all it is an arrest, because there's all of this has to happen before there's an arrest. So a lot of times when I say that you can't have been not arrested, but you can't have been convicted for domestic battery and be a cop, there's a whole big difference between being arrested and going through all of this and being convicted. So let's go through what these steps are. So first appearance. So that's that first thing, first appearance. So after you're arrested, you're taken to jail. And all that happens when you go to jail is you're booked in. They're getting your fingerprints. They're taking that picture, your booking picture, which we're all familiar of because you see it of celebrities all the time when they're arrested. And they're putting you in the system. They're getting your fingerprints in the system. They're putting you in the system so they know who you are. And then generally what they're doing is they're either getting money from you, or you are getting money from a bail bondsman, which is generally you're putting up collateral, which means your house or a car, or you're putting 10% down of whatever your bail is. And you're agreeing that, hey, you will show up for your first appearance, so that they know that they don't have to go find you, okay? And so within hours of being booked, you're going to be brought before a magistrate, and you're going to have your cases heard. A magistrate's a judge, and the magistrate's going to set your bail. And you're either going to be given a bail bondsman, like I said, or you're really rich and you have the money, and you're going to be appointed counsel if you can't afford one, or if you're rich or you have the money or whatever, you know, a friend. They're going to get involved at this time, depending on your personal financial circumstances. And often at this point, it's clear the more money you have, the more freedom that you have, depending on the crime. All right, so this is kind of the first time you make a first appearance. This is pretty much the time where everybody says not guilty, because you don't really know what's going to happen. You haven't really talked to an attorney. You don't know what's going on. You robbed a store, so it's a felony. You could do prison time, so that's scary stuff. So you're pretty much going to say not guilty. You're going to get a bail bondsman. You're going to put 10% down, and you're going to go home. Okay, they're going to take your fingerprints, they're going to take your picture, and you're going home. And you're going to think about this later, you're going to meet with the attorney later, and that's just how it works. Okay. Next, we have the preliminary hearing. So if we go back, now we're at that second step. We've done the first appearance, they've taken our picture, we're in the system, we have a date for the preliminary hearing, we've pled not guilty, we've gotten out on bail, we've got a date in there, but it's in the future. Okay, a judge looks into the probable cause. Well, you guys know what probable cause is because you've heard of that before. It's a cop that says, hey, Tiffany, because I'm the suspect here, Tiffany, the cop either saw Tiffany or had enough witnesses that saw someone who looked like me sign witness statements or has a video of me that says I went into the store and I had a what looked like a gun and I threatened the clerk and I took the cash and they wrote the police report. So they had enough probable cause, which means a reasonable person believed that I robbed the store. And so the judge looks at that the report that I wrote and says whether or not they think there's enough evidence to move this case forward. Okay. So not only did a cop think that there was enough that the cop arrested me, but now a judge is reading through at this preliminary hearing and determining whether or not there's enough evidence. They're saying, okay, is this gun in evidence? Is there a connection? They're looking at discovery. They're looking at this. If the judge doesn't think there's enough evidence, if the judge goes, man, that cop wrote an awful report, or man, that cop lied before, whatever if the judge doesn't believe the cop, or if it's a bad report, or there's no video, or whatever the reasoning, the judge at this point at the preliminary hearing can throw the case out and say, Tiffany, you're free to go. We're not taking this case any further. And this will be it. It's done. And I can go woohoo and celebrate and I can get my 10% back. Okay. So, or the judge can go, man, the cop's report looks good. There's enough probable cause. There's a video of her pulling the gun, or there's 2 witnesses that saw her pull the gun and identified her. The judge can say, nope, we're moving forward. So again, going back, we're going to move to information or indictment. Okay, so now we're on to information or indictment. This is where the prosecutor, so this is the lawyer who works for the county that says, wow, the cop saw this happen. There's witnesses. We have that gun. Tiffany did plead not guilty and Tiffany's out on bail. However, the judge saw the case, read the case, says there's enough evidence to move forward. So we're going to move forward to grand jury. We're going to let a jury just look at the case. We've already had a judge look at it, but we're going to let the grand jury look at the case and see if they think there's enough evidence. Okay. Let's see what they think. Okay. So grand jury looks at the case, they read the report, they see the video, and they go, if they go, nope, we don't think there's enough, they throw it out and I get to go home. I get a notice in the mail and I go, woohoo, I'm done. I don't get prosecuted. However, if the grand jury goes, wow, a cop saw the video and witnesses and said I did it, a judge said I did it, we think we did it, it keeps going through the system, man, it keeps moving forward through the system. Then guess what? It keeps moving forward and now we're on to arraignment. So folks, let's go back. The cop arrested me, said I did it, wrote a report, has the witnesses, has the evidence. The preliminary hearing, the judge said I did it. The grand jury said I did it. Do you guys getting all this? How many people are looking at all this evidence saying I did it? And I haven't even made it to a jury trial yet. All these people are looking at it. Okay, so arraignment. This is the first time that I actually go into open court and I stand up and they read, the prosecutor stands there. I stand with my defense attorney because I've actually met with my defense attorney. And the judge actually says, Tiffany, here's the charges against you. You are being charged officially with robbery, and they read all the charges. How do you plead? And I say not guilty or whatever. And most of the time, this is where plea bargains happen. Most of the time, the prosecutor's saying, Tiffany, this is the first time you've ever entered a robbery. We'll let you plead down to a misdemeanor because 90%, this is what happens is plea bargains. Last minute, they call me back in a room. Hey, we'll let you plead down to theft and you can, spend and pay a fine of blah, 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 blah. And then we go back to the judge and we say, the defense attorney says, Tiffany's willing to plead to this, and I go, okay, and we sign it off. But ever so often, we might go to trial, but that's only ever so often. And then there's an adjudication, and this is where a jury goes forward. It's really expensive, and then there's sentencing. So if I do a plea bargain, this is where they say, okay, you did a plea bargain. Yes, I plead guilty, and I submit to the plea bargain. I'm going to plead guilty to the misdemeanor and pay the fine. Or this is where the jury trial came back and found me not guilty or guilty or whatever. And that's it. So any questions with the steps after the arrest, so that you guys know that when somebody gets to a jury trial, that all these steps have taken place? Are you guys understand that? Are you guys clear with all those steps that have taken place after a cop has arrested somebody, that all those steps have taken place before somebody has either made a plea bargain or somebody has made it to a jury trial? That somebody just doesn't go from making an arrest and right to a jury trial. Does everybody get that? Are you clear about that? You need to be clear about that. That it's made it through many different phases, through a judge looking at the probable cause, that it's made it through a grand jury looking at the probable cause and reading the report before that person's even stood up and had the case, read what they're being charged with and entered their plea. Does everybody get that? I just want to make sure that you get that. Give me some thumbs up or something. All right, yay, awesome. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Because sometimes it's hard to get that, and I get that, because that's kind of tough stuff to understand. Okay, so rights, constitutional rights. We've talked about Miranda, and this is just kind of understanding that you have the right to an attorney. You have a right to a speedy trial. We've talked about this. This is just a slide that really goes through that so that you understand that. I'm not going to review this again because we have talked about this at length. All right, so if the defense attorney says, if you have a video of a person that kills or rapes a victim and that person pleads not guilty, what are some reasons why it's good that that person has a defense attorney? So I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to put you guys in breakout rooms to answer this. But again, let's read through it so you know what you're answering. If there is a video of a person that has killed or raped a victim and that person pleads not guilty, even though there's a video of them killing or raping the victim, why is it a good idea for that person to have a defense attorney? So that's what question you're going to be answering in your breakout rooms. All right, give you about 4 minutes. All right, as people go back in, who wants to go first on this one? Why is it a good idea, even if there's a video of somebody committing a crime, such as murder or rape, to have a defense attorney?
In group one, we just kind of said it's a good idea for somebody who might not know the court system that well to have legal guidance and maybe somebody to work out a plea bargain or something.
Okay.
Because if you have somebody dead to rights like that, there's no way to get out of a case like that.
Okay, good. Okay, next.
Yeah, in group 4, we kind of said the same thing, that they would want an attorney so that they could get a better deal when it comes to their sentence. That's kind of what we concluded.
Okay, sentencing is on top. Okay, what else?
We kind of said the same thing in group number 2. We said a defense attorney can help the person know their rights throughout the trial and potentially get them a lower sentence.
Okay.
In group 3, we basically said that too. Like, you want a good attorney to just reduce your jail time as much as possible.
Okay.
In group 5, we were saying, yeah, like get the defense attorney can keep them out of trouble from harming themselves essentially, and like work out a better plea bargain and maybe a lower sentence.
Okay. Any other groups? Groups 2. Nobody else wants to go. Okay. I'll tell you that Chief O'Mara said such a great thing when he was one of my guest speakers. His brother was a defense attorney. And I can tell you it's hard being a cop because one thing that's tough is when you see victims of crimes. And I'm not talking about just one little thing or small crimes. I'm talking about victims that are killed or victims that are seriously injured, kind of like Kaylee's Law that we talked about, you know, seeing her parents, going to have to tell her parents, or telling the parent of a 4-year-old that he was killed. I won't even go there, but there's some tough ones. And then seeing the suspects get off with defense attorneys, good defense attorneys on complications. And so I remember Chief O'Mara's brother was a defense attorney. And so he was in my classroom one time talking, and I will never forget, he said, because he's such an amazing chief, and he said, you know, he goes, I always used to get mad at him and go, how can you be a defense attorney? And he goes, because they're courtrooms and we have a checks and balances system. And it doesn't matter what the crime is, you need a checks and balances on each side to ensure that the right things are done and all of the rules are followed on both sides, right? So even if, I don't care what side you're on, but everybody should know that even if you're on the right side, even your side can screw up and mess up. And so you need somebody on the other side, whatever side that is, to make sure you're doing it right. Okay? How many times have you done a homework assignment or done something and you've made a mistake and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that, right? Because somebody was paying attention. And so that's what we need constantly, is somebody paying attention to make sure somebody's doing it right. And that's what we need no matter what. And so that's why, even if there's a video of somebody breaking the law, we need somebody there making sure that the law is being followed on how it's set up. So that's what it's all about, folks, because nobody's perfect, and we need to make sure that there's that checks and balances. There's that transparency always going on, whether it's cops, whether it's courts, whether it's corrections. So really, really important. All right, so let me get back to sharing my screen. Okay, so the bail system. So this is really tough. You know, you noticed, or hopefully you noticed in one of the earlier slides, that, you know, bail, it's relative. You know, if you're a rich person, it's not that big of a deal for you. If you don't have enough money to pay your rent, then you're stuck in jail. And how fair is that? So this is something to think about, and it's something that they are thinking about, and it's something in our criminal justice reform that needs to be thought about. Its original purpose was to ensure that somebody returns to court. However, nowadays, you know, is it fair that somebody that has a lot of money gets out and somebody that doesn't does? You know, things to think about. All right, okay, if you ever accrue, you know, these are things to think about as well. DUIs. I kind of spoke about this a little bit last week, you know, and I've spoke about that we have a 0.08 limit, and most states do 0.08, 0.10. You know, what would happen if you were driving and you got a DUI? Have you ever thought how much it would cost you? They say it's around $10,000 to $20,000 just because of what you have to carry with insurance and what happens socially. If you do want to go into the criminal justice field as far as a career, what happens? So it's just really, really huge. I always tell students, especially with Uber and everything around, I also say, like we talked last week, you know, even though we have a limit, if you're driving and somebody runs out in front of you like a child, they're going to run your blood. And if you are under the influence, that could impact you. So make sure that you're constantly thinking about what's going on around you and what you're doing, because that car that you're driving is a deadly weapon. All right. Wow, we finished that soon. Okay. Any question about the courts? The biggest thing that you do need to understand is the court process and what happens after you're arrested, as far as sentencing and the arraignment and pretrial and the deals that go out as far as plea bargains. You need to make sure that you get that and you have a really good understanding of that. So any questions as far as that goes? All right, well then we have time